I am Evelyn Carter, 64 years old. And on that bright Saturday in Charleston, I was walking into my son's wedding with my heart swelling with pride. The hotel ballroom smelled of roses and champagne. The chandeliers cast a golden haze over silk-draped tables, and for a moment I thought I belonged there as much as anyone else. I clutched my purse, reminding myself that I had paid for half of what glittered in that room. From the polished cutlery to the towering cake waiting on its pedestal. I found my seat near the center. A folded card rested on the crisp white tablecloth. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, expecting to see my name. Mrs. Carter. Instead, written in rushed black ink. The words slashed across the card. Uneducated Pretend Mom. My chest tightened. The letters burned against the paper, mocking me in front of the strangers already leaning closer, whispering, some even raising their phones to capture my reaction. My son, Daniel, handsome in his gray suit, walked over just as my throat closed. With shame, he took the card from my hand and read it aloud. His voice cracked on the word pretend. For a heartbeat, the room stilled. Everyone waiting to see if he would laugh along, shrug it off, or pretend it didn't matter. But he didn't. His jaw set and he lifted his head, his voice suddenly firm. This wedding is over, he declared, staring straight at the bride's side of the room. A ripple of gasps filled the hall. Stephanie's relatives froze, eyes darting, while Daniel slipped his hand into mine. Come on, Mom, he said, pulling me gently but firmly away from the table. My knees felt weak, but I followed, my heels clicking against the marble floor as every eye trailed us. No one stopped us. No one defended me. It was only silence and the sound of our steps echoing down the long corridor. As the heavy doors closed behind us, I realized I was no longer part of their celebration. I was part of something else entirely. Something I could not yet name, but would soon discover. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I kept telling myself that the small slights didn't matter. I was the mother of the groom. After all, surely there would be a place for me in the excitement. But as the plans unfolded, my role shrank smaller and smaller until it almost disappeared. When the cake tasting happened, I only found out because Daniel mentioned it afterward in passing. Stephanie's mother, Karen, had arranged the bakery, chosen the flavors, and even posted photos online of the tasting, smiling with her daughter as though they alone carried the joy of the celebration. No one had invited me. I scrolled through the pictures on my phone that night, my stomach turning, wondering if Daniel had noticed I wasn't there. Then came the florist meeting. I asked Daniel what flowers they had chosen, hoping to imagine them in my mind. He hesitated, his voice uneasy. They've already decided, Mom, he said softly. They wanted pays. I pressed my lips together, swallowing the sting. I had loved roses my whole life, and I had always pictured them on his wedding day. But there was no space for my vision. Every detail seemed to be planned around what I wasn't. I wasn't elegant, as Karen liked to put it. I wasn't refined enough, not polished enough, not the image they wanted to present to their guests. I was the woman who had worked nights at the high school library, who had patched shoes and clipped coupons to stretch every dollar. They never said it Outright, but their silences spoke. Louder than any insult. Still, I told myself to endure it for Daniel, for his happiness. Yet, in the quiet moments alone in my kitchen, folding invitations or checking receipts, I began to feel the creeping suspicion that I wasn't being overlooked by accident. I was being erased. The morning of the wedding should have felt like a dream, but instead, I woke with a heaviness in my chest. When I opened my closet, I realized I had never received a clear note about the dress code. I had chosen a navy blue gown, modest, simple. Something I thought dignified. Yet, as soon as I stepped into the ballroom, I felt the sting of eyes sliding over me. Nearly every woman on the bride's side wore shades of ivory and blush, coordinated as if by design. I was the lone patch of dark color in a sea of pale silk. I tried to ignore it, keeping my smile steady, but the tension in the air was undeniable. The bridesmaids huddled near the back, whispering behind manicured hands. One of them, a tall girl with a phone glued to her palm, tilted her screen toward me and smirked. She raised her camera, angling it just as I reached my table. The red light blinked. She was filming me. I told myself it was harmless, just youthful vanity. But then I saw Karen, elegant in her pearl dress, standing not far away with a glass of champagne. Her expression never wavered, but her eyes lingered on me with a cool detachment, as though she were measuring how out of place I looked. It was then I began to understand. None of this was accidental. I placed my purse on the chair, forcing my hands to stay still. Though they trembled inside, I told myself Daniel would notice, that he would say something, that he would see I didn't belong in the picture they were painting. My hope clung to him, fragile but steady. Because if he didn't see it, if he couldn't, then I truly was alone in that room. Daniel's face was pale when he read the words on the card. For a heartbeat, he looked caught, torn between the life he had been planning and the woman who had raised him. Stephanie stood frozen at the far end of the table, her lips pressed tightly together, eyes darting toward her mother, as though waiting for a cue. Not one word of protest came from her. The room grew tense, the chatter collapsing into whispers. Phones were lifted higher, recording the moment as though it were theater. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to sink into the floor, to disappear before the humiliation swallowed me whole. But Daniel didn't look away. He read the words again. Softer this time, as if testing them against the truth of who I was. Then something in his expression hardened. He placed the card flat on the table, straightened his shoulders, and said, "This isn't my mother's name." His voice carried through the hush, low but steady. "And if this is the kind of welcome my family is expected to accept, then there will be no wedding." A wave of gasps rippled across the ballroom. Karen's hand tightened around her champagne glass, but she didn't speak. Stephanie lifted her chin, but her silence cut deeper than any insult. Daniel turned to me, his hand reaching for mine. "Come with me, Mom." I felt every eye follow us as we walked across the marble floor. My heels clicked like a drum beat in the cavernous silence, each step heavier than the last. No one tried to stop us. The doors loomed ahead, tall and polished, reflecting our figures as if sealing the moment into memory. When they closed behind us with a muffled thud, I knew something had ended. Not just a wedding, but the fragile hope that I could ever belong in their world. The cafe we found sat on the bend of the Ashley River, a quiet place where tourists rarely lingered. The windows were strewn with sunlight and the smell of roasted beans clung to the air. Daniel and I slipped into a corner booth away from curious eyes. For a while, we said nothing. The silence between us felt heavier than the laughter we had left behind at the hotel. I wrapped both hands around the warm mug the waitress placed in front of me. The coffee was strong, bitter, the kind that lingered on the tongue. I sipped it slowly, staring at the swirl of steam as if it might tell me what came next. My throat ached with words I couldn't yet release. Finally, they tumbled out. Daniel, did I ruin your wedding? My voice was thin, almost childlike, and it startled me. I had spent decades being strong, never asking for reassurance, but in that moment, I needed it more than breath. He shook his head, his eyes re-eaning. No, Mom. You didn't ruin anything. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. I searched his face, looking for cracks of hesitation, for signs he was only trying to comfort me. But his jaw was firm, his hands steady on the table. He wasn't wavering. You think you can forgive them? I asked quietly. I don't want to, he answered. His voice carried no anger, only certainty. If they can treat you like that on the most important day of my life, then what would the rest of my future look like with them? I can't ignore it. I exhaled, a long, trembling release. The bitterness of the coffee softened on my tongue for the first time since walking out of that ballroom. I began to believe that maybe we hadn't lost everything. Maybe we had only lost what needed to be left behind. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my kitchen table, illuminating the worn leather notebook where I kept every receipt and payment slip. My hands moved carefully as I flipped through the pages. Each line of ink a reminder of how much I had given. The down payment for the ballroom, the deposit for the caterer, the installments for the photographer. Nearly $40,000 had already left my account. I stared at the numbers, my pen tapping against the paper. A part of me wanted to let it go, to accept the loss and retreat quietly. But another part, the part that had endured years of balancing bills on a library clerk's salary, rose to the surface. I hadn't worked late nights and skipped vacations only to have my name turned into a slur on a wedding card. I picked up the phone. My voice was calm as I spoke to the bank, giving instructions to stop any pending transfers. Then I called the apartment complex where I had planned to secure a lease for Daniel and Stephanie. The lease was still unsigned, the keys still in my drawer. I won't be finalizing that agreement, I told the manager firmly. When I hung up, the house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I sat back, pressing my palms flat against the notebook. The money no longer felt like a chain around my neck. It felt like something I could redirect, something I could reclaim for a purpose yet to be named. I thought of Daniel, of his tired eyes across the cafe table, of the way his voice had steadied when he chose me over a room full of strangers. If I had to rebuild everything from that moment, then at least I would be building it with him and on my terms. 2 days later, Daniel showed up at my House with a phone clutched in his hand. His face was pale, but his eyes carried a fire I hadn't seen before. He set the phone on the table, pressed play, and slid it toward me. The screen flickered. With a recording. One of the bridesmaids must have been filming the ballroom. Before the ceremony, her camera catching everything in its casual sweep. At first, it showed nothing unusual, the gleam of silverware, the bouquets lined up neatly on the tables. Then the lens tilted. There, standing by my chair, was Karen Miller. Her pearl bracelet clinked as she leaned over the table. In her hand was a black marker. With a quick flick of her wrist, she scribbled across the place card and set it down, smoothing it with satisfaction before walking away. I felt my stomach twist. Proof, not just suspicion, not just whispered cruelty, but undeniable evidence. Daniel's voice was tight. One of the bridesmaids sent it to me this morning. She said she couldn't keep it to herself anymore. He paused, his hands curling into fists. I sent it to my lawyer already. I told him to halt the prenup papers and review everything. If this is how they start, I don't want to imagine how it would continue. For a moment, I could only sit there, listening to the hum of the old clock on my wall. Relief mingled with grief, leaving me unsteady. I reached for his hand across the table. You don't deserve this kind of cruelty, I said quietly. Neither did he. Yet in that moment, I realized we had both been spared. The truth, ugly as it was, had given us a way out. The following week, I sat in a polished office that smelled faintly of leather and ink. Across the desk, my attorney, Mr. Whitman, adjusted his glasses and studied the notes I had written in my old ledger. He had handled my modest estate planning years before, never once treating me as anything less than capable. Now, his eyes softened with recognition as he listened. I don't want the money to sit idle, I explained. It was meant to build a future. It still can, just not the one we expected. He nodded slowly. What did you have in mind? I looked out the window at the city street where students with backpacks hurried past in the autumn light. My chest tightened. A scholarship, I said finally. For the kids of school workers, custodians, cafeteria ladies, bus drivers, the ones people walk past without ever learning their names. I want those children to feel doors opening instead of closing in their faces. Mr. Whitman leaned back, tapping his pen against the folder. It's unusual, but it can be done. We'll need to set up a trust, establish criteria, choose a board. I'll call it the Carter Horizon Fund, I said, the name forming with certainty on my tongue. Because for too long, people like us are told our horizons are limited. I want this fund to say otherwise. He smiled. Then not the polite smile of an attorney, but something warmer. That's a legacy, Evelyn. Not just a reaction. For the first time since the wedding, I felt something uncoil inside me. The insult had carved deep. But here, in this room, I was shaping it into something stronger than revenge. I was shaping it into hope. It didn't take long for the video to find its way beyond Daniel's lawyer. Within a week, it was circulating on social media feeds across Charleston. Parents from the high school where I had worked tagged me in posts outraged on my behalf. Disgraceful. One caption read, "No mother should be treated this way." Even local news stations picked it up, playing the clip of Karen Miller leaning over the table, the marker in her hand. The backlash was swift. A florist who had supplied the arrangements announced publicly that she would no longer take commissions from the Miller family. The bakery quietly removed photos of Stephanie's cake from their website. What had been meant as a celebration of elegance turned into a showcase of cruelty, and people noticed. Then came the letter. It arrived folded neatly in a cream-colored envelope. Stephanie's handwriting on the front. Inside, her words spilled in careful lines. "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. We never intended to hurt you. Please know the wedding stress got the better of us." I read it twice. The phrases echoing like hollow shells. Misunderstanding. Stress. Not once did she admit the truth of what her mother had done, nor the silence she herself had kept when Daniel declared the wedding over. I placed the letter back into the envelope and sealed it inside a manila folder for my attorney. No reply, no confrontation. Silence, I had learned, could cut sharper than shouting. That evening, as I watered the small row of potted herbs on my porch, I felt the night air settle cool against my skin. The world was already judging for me. I didn't need to add a single word. In the months that followed, Daniel carried a heaviness that showed in his shoulders. He went to work each day, but when he came by my house in the evenings, I could see the shadow in his eyes. He admitted once over takeout cartons spread across my kitchen table. That shame clung to him more tightly than he expected. "I should have seen it earlier," he said, pushing a piece of chicken around with his fork. "The way they spoke to you, the way they left you out," I kept telling myself it was just nerves, just wedding stress. But I was blind. Mom, I wanted so badly for it to work that I ignored what was right in front of me. I reached across the table, covering his hand. "You chose the truth when it mattered most. That's what counts." Still, he wrestled with guilt to work through it. He began volunteering at the high school where I had spent decades shelving books and cleaning up after students. He mentored kids on weekends, tutoring them in math, and helping fill out college applications. Sometimes he dragged me along, insisting I sit in on scholarship meetings or join the bake sales the students organized. Slowly, his posture shifted, his voice steadied. One Saturday, as we stacked boxes of donated supplies, he looked at me and said, "I used to think family was about avoiding conflict, keeping the peace no matter what. Now I know it's about standing up. Even if your voice shakes, you taught me that." His words settled into me like a bomb. The wound of that day at the ballroom hadn't vanished. But watching Daniel step into a stronger version of himself gave the pain a purpose. It was no longer just a story of what we lost, but of who he became. 1 year later, the ballroom was nothing more than a memory. But the auditorium of Charleston High was alive with voices. Rows of students and parents filled the seats, their faces bright with anticipation. On stage, a banner stretched across the wall. Carter Horizon Fund, First Annual Scholarship Awards. My hands shook as I adjusted the microphone, but when I looked out, I saw Daniel sitting in the front row, his expression steady and proud. I cleared my throat. When I was Younger, I believed that the world measured people by titles, job titles, degrees, the names written on place. But I have learned that dignity isn't handed to you. It's claimed by how you treat others and by what you choose to build. The audience was quiet, listening. A girl in the second row leaned forward, her eyes wide. This scholarship, I continued, is for the children of those who work hard behind the scenes. For the janitors, the bus drivers, the cafeteria staff, the ones who make our schools possible. Your horizons are wide, and I hope this is one step toward them. Applause rose, strong and steady. As I stepped back, Daniel stood and clapped until his palms turned red. His pride washed over me like sunlight breaking through clouds. Later that afternoon, as we drove home, we passed the hotel where the wedding had unraveled. Its grand facade gleamed in the distance, unchanged. I expected my chest to tighten, but instead, I felt nothing but calm. Daniel glanced at me. You want to stop? I shook my head, smiling faintly. No, we've already taken what we needed from that place. We kept driving, the road stretching ahead, the horizon open, exactly where it belonged. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.